Hello and welcome back. It's great having you again. Today is a special day. Not only because we're going to talk about perhaps the most feared element in case cracking, which you can guess is finance, but also because we have a guest speaker. His name is Guus. He's a former case competitor and he has plenty of experience with cracking cases. Moreover, he is also a case coach, so a colleague of Britta and myself. And together we prepare students to participate in international case-solving competitions and to compete for the gold medal, of course.
True. Along the years, we have developed a strong alumni network. Guus is the perfect example how far case solving can take you. But let me ask him to do the talking. Guus, do you hear us?
Hi Britta, hi Hans. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. And thanks for the nice introduction.
As you can see, you are in great hands. So let's continue with the second part of the implementation plan. The stage is yours, Guus.
So before we start, I want to reassure you that there is nothing to be afraid of. We will simplify things when possible and proceed with small steps. And don't forget that you can always pause the video and listen again if something's unclear. I also want to mention that this video will not replace your finance course. Instead, we take financial knowledge you probably already know and apply it to cracking cases. So, we talk about the impact you create today, mostly in financial terms, and we will also touch upon how you want to deal with risks. First, let's talk finance. Finances are a central part of case cracking, and you will likely need to work with numbers along the whole case solving cycle. First, to understand the firm and the issues they are facing, usually you will carry out a financial analysis. Then, when you are comparing different ideas, you should be able to look at these from a financial perspective. And finally, during the implementation phase, when you propose the best solution, do not forget to emphasize the financial consequences. So, at least to some extent, you will need to work with numbers, but to what extent depends on the case. If you work with a firm active in financial services, like a bank or an insurance company, probably you will dig into the finances deeper because their operations are much more complex in comparison to a small brewery, for example. But this is not a rule. Every case is different. And in addition, time is an important factor. You are expected to go through to different levels of depth if you solve a case in a very short amount of time. For instance, 3 hours versus where you have a day or weeks to craft your advice. And lastly, it depends on your team and how thorough you want to be with the finances based on what information is provided. You have a little bit of freedom here to take your unique perspective and show the finances from your point of view. Although I have to say, based on our experience, there are some key elements you would want to address almost every time. Your first steps in the case solving cycle are to read the case and prepare the internal and external analysis. When you read a case, besides other general information, highlight the finance related details so you can conduct the financial analysis. Don't forget to check the appendices because often you will find a balance sheet or a cash flow statement or other relevant information already compiled. Use this data to answer the following. How does the firm make money? What are drivers of shareholder value? What are the firm's financial resources? Try to identify the patterns in their performance. How are sales developing compared to the cost? Are margins under pressure? Or under what conditions does the company break even? Let's take a look at WellYou. What is relevant here? We know that their cash reserves are 30,000 euros and Adam is concerned of bankruptcy for a good reason. Given that we know the expenses of the company, which is above 48k for the first 6 months of the year, we can estimate how much time the firm can operate from these funds. These expenses translate to 8,000 euros a month, concluding that the company will likely go bankrupt very soon, most probably in less than 4 months. One can ask, how much money does WellYou need to operate? We can just multiply the monthly expenses to calculate that. This is the simple way, and unless things change a lot, it's probably a realistic calculation for the short term. But because we have data across the years, we can create a much more reliable forecasting. We can do that by extrapolating the data for 2022, and based on the historical patterns in costs, we do the extrapolation. Of course, we have limited information on the expenses, and if we have a more detailed breakdown, then we can be more precise, because then you can make a difference between recurring costs and one-time investments, so we know how much money WellYou will need to break even. In any case, the firm needs to finance for the expenses we foresee. But we know that the cash reserves are low and decreasing. Due to this weak financial situation, it's risky to invest into WellYou. And this is critical because next, when you ideate about possible solutions, you want to assess which directions are worth taking. In other words, you will need to know the boundaries within that you can operate, so that your solution is feasible. Regarding the techniques of ideation and how you select the best solution, the only addition I want to make is to not forget to add financial criteria to your decision making matrix. So, let's focus on the most important phase, the strategy implementation. Given you have chosen the solution to pursue, you will need to answer a few questions, like what are the initial investment costs? How to fund the proposal? What returns will your proposal yield? What are the annual operating costs? Or how much revenues will it bring into and through which revenue streams? The input to answering these questions comes together from all directions and from all team members as you work through the implementation. You will need to keep track of every single activity to assess their impact on the finances. You must always indicate the total cost of your proposal. Therefore, you will estimate the cost or asset requirement, which must be based on materials, supplies, equipment, physical plant, manpower, and other project needs. Maybe you notice that these questions are all future-oriented. And that's correct because in the implementation plan, the emphasis shifts from past and current situation to the future situation. And especially for finance, this can be a tricky part. I can already hear you ask yourself, how can I come up with these numbers? In the end, no one can exactly predict the future, and you are no different. So, what you want to keep in mind is that we are not predicting the future, but we are forming our expectations for it. And expectations can always be backed up with arguments. Estimating the additional investment and deciding how you fund your proposal come hand in hand. You need a plan to fund what you're going to implement. So, if you think that WellYou should be released from Android, then what you want to do is estimate all the costs involved, broken down as detailed as you can. Here, you need a certain number of hours for development, as well as testing the app and deploying it in the Play Store, and that, all in all, will cost 15,000 euros. Now, how can you fund that amount? Normally, you can do that internally by reallocating your budgets or bringing funds from outside, which is, in the case of WellYou, very unlikely. Moving on from investment to the result, you will need to assess the impact of your proposal. You want to measure success. These can be measured by multiple indicators, for instance, net profit margin, gross profit margin, asset turnover. What is most widely used in case solving is return on investment, which states how profitable a plan is by comparing expected benefits with the expected costs. So, if you spend 15k on deploying an app to Android, then you want to argue that after a certain amount of time and by reaching a certain amount of users, you have positive return on the investments. So that means that your benefits outweigh the costs. If you manage to prove that, then you have a solid proposal from a financial perspective. A job well done. We can conclude the finance part. Now we know what impact our solution has on the firm's financial position. Besides that, there are perhaps many other areas to look at, based on what the case you solve requires. That can be anywhere from reassessing the position of the firm to the impact on their stakeholder involvement. is really case specific. However, no matter what case you encounter and what solution you're going to pursue, one thing is certain: you will need to deal with risk. Things go wrong, and more often than you think. So what should we do about it? Firstly, let's make an important distinction between risk and uncertainty. The uncertainty is something we cannot calculate. We know it exists, but exactly when and how this will influence us, we have no idea. Risk, on the other hand, can be measured and quantified and is therefore calculatable. Whenever we solve a case, we encounter both cases. On one hand, there is uncertainty of what happens tomorrow with WellYou, which would be difficult to quantify, but also the risk of, for instance, running out of funds. And with every single month, week, or even days passing by, that risk is higher. When you solve your case, do not forget to think in risks. Try to identify the undesirable event outcomes. Think in multiple directions. What if this or that happens? What if your plan goes all wrong? To give it a visual appeal, make it easy to grasp, you can create a risk assessment matrix, which is a simple tool that helps you with the visual presentation of your risks. Try to plot the risks you have identified on the matrix based on the severity and potential impact. Now you're one final step away from rounding up your implementation plan. Ask 2 questions. First one is, what can you do to prevent the risk from happening? And the second, what can you do once the risk becomes a reality to dampen its negative effect? These questions help the company develop mitigation plans and contingencies for the situation when things go south. To facilitate the process, you are expected to give at least some directions. So let's take a step back. Many of you thought that finance would be the hardest part of the case. But by following these steps and these guidelines, we are sure that you can manage to build a financially feasible implementation plan, including risks. Thanks for your attention, and right now we move back to Hans and Britta.
Thank you, Guus. Well said. This concludes our implementation plan, and that means the case cracking cycle is over.
Yeah.
Of course, the job is not done, because you will want to present your findings as well. About that in our next episode. Stay tuned and see you soon.